Hello everyone and welcome, or welcome back. As you already saw, we're going to be talking about the new Jack White albums. Mr. White saw fit to bless us with 2 albums this year, Fear of the Dawn back in April, and Entering Heaven Alive just this past July. Initially intended as one big mega album, cooler heads prevailed, and Jack chose to release the material across 2 separate records. Much to the benefit of both, allowing for a consistent feel and tone throughout each experience. These albums present an earnest glimpse at Jack White's conflicting personalities. A sonic representation of his very own Jekyll and Hyde, if you will. Before we start dissecting things, let's look at what exactly is going on in each album and what sets them apart. Fear of the Dawn was recorded in Jack's Nashville studio at Third Man Records, using all of the latest state-of-the-art production techniques. Entering Heaven Alive was recorded in that same studio, but with far less post-production trickery. The songs were performed and recorded live in studio. Certainly some polishing and perfecting took place in the mastering phase, but as you can surely tell by listening to these albums side by side, this one did not get nearly as much. While Fear of the Dawn exemplifies Jack's more manic and raucous tendencies, Entering Heaven Alive showcases the folksier, rootsier, and more delicate nuance that Jack is capable of as a songwriter. I've heard a few people refer to the latter album as an acoustic album, and that's not entirely true. The electric guitar does make an appearance on this album, but its role is more subdued and intentional. Versus Fear of the Dawn, which feels like it is constantly trying to drown you in an electrified cacophony. Not to say that this is a bad thing. A lot of my favorite songs from White are the recklessly noisy, overblown amplification, growling, distorted songs that hit you like a Barbara cheap shot to the jaw. The titular song, Fear of the Dawn, for example, is very reminiscent of one of my favorite tracks off of Icky Thump, Little Cream Soda. Both employ a similar riff where we have this low, distorted guitar grumbling like a distant but fast-approaching thunderclap, only to resolve into one of Jack's signature high-pitched, treble-boosted guitar screeches. The difference in approach to these albums is best exemplified through the first single released for both, Taking Me Back, or Taking Me Back, parentheses gently, for the Entering Heaven Alive version. It's essentially the same song, but each produced in the differing philosophies of its corresponding album. Whereas the Fear of the Dawn version wastes no time cranking the volume and peppering nearly every moment of the song with added noise and effects for that manic emphasis. The layers and layers of keen production and technological vision bolster the song into a grandiose display of indulgence, with nary an opportunity wasted for White to show off what he's capable of when he's got a full box of tools to play with. Whereas its counterpart, Taking Me Back Gently, presents more like an old-time rag playing in the back of a saloon. Its folksy, unpolished presentation gives it far less of a punch, but arguably more humanity. It's very familiar territory to anyone who's been a fan of Jack White for any amount of time, but especially since his earlier days with the White Stripes. It actually reminds me a bit of their rendition of St. James Infirmary off their first album. So what does any of this matter? You see, Jack is an artist of 2 worlds. He is somehow both a futurist and a traditionalist. This was always present in the attitude of his work with the White Stripes. They would often play old blues tunes, but in ways that were very modern, with high distorted guitars and quick frantic energy, that stood in defiance to the classic blues style, but still kept the angst-rattled spirit, giving these songs a whole new life for a whole new generation. But even then, the Stripes insisted on recording on analog tape instead of using the newest state-of-the-art methods, almost treating digital production like some sort of enemy. It shows that Jack, throughout his entire career, has always been willing to modernize, willing to look to the future, but only in some respects, while remaining stubbornly affixed to traditional methods in other areas. There's a somewhat infamous clip from the documentary It Might Get Loud, which I would definitely recommend if you are a guitar player, in which the Edge from U2 is going over the complexity of his effects setup, how many computers are involved, all the different boards and buttons, and the Edge explains how he'll spend hours trying to get the perfect sound he's hearing in his head. He sees all this technology and effects as just another tool to be mastered in order to express what he wants to express. It then cuts right to Jack explaining how technology is an enemy to creativity, that it only makes things easier. It doesn't help you be more creative or make anything better. It steals from the experience more than it gives. I believe at the time, Jack may have felt this way, but I can't help but feel that this attitude has come back to bite him a bit, especially once he began to explore his solo career once the Stripes had parted ways. I think that Jack was eager to start experimenting. We saw this in some of his work with Raconteurs and The Dead Weather. But he still felt somewhat shackled by these stances that he had avowed himself to, knowing that fans would have certain expectations of him. And for a little while, he played it kind of safe. While there are definitely enjoyable moments on Blunderbuss and Lazaretto, you can tell it wasn't until Boarding House Reach where he just shrugged his shoulders and said, "Fuck it," and went buck wild. to mixed results, to say the least. I don't know many people who love this album. I know a few who respect it in terms of an artist, finally expanding their horizons and trying new things, but I haven't run into too many people who would call this their favorite, myself being one of them. I appreciate the attempt, but I don't spin this one too often. So after this, Jack finds himself in somewhat of a peculiar position. He's already taken the leap, but his fans seem about just as stubborn as him. They weren't too keen on the new eccentric Jack. He didn't really alienate anyone, I don't think. It wasn't really like a crash and burn type of an album. It just wasn't exactly what his fans were looking for. So does he backtrack and make the music that fans expect out of him? Music that he's arguably best at? Or does he double down and keep making the music that's exciting to him, but may not be what his audience wants? Ever so clever in any endeavor, Jack does the best thing for everybody and says, why not both? Fear of the Dawn is the clear successor to Boarding House Reach. I would venture to say this one's a little more reined in, which I do appreciate. It's not that I'm against experimentation, but there were moments on Boarding House Reach that felt like they were reaching, no pun intended. Like the experimentation wasn't there to explore new territory or push boundaries. It was just there to sound weird and ultimately kind of annoying. I will never get the screeching from Corporation out of my head.
Hey, want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
Fear of the Dawn takes chances that work out a little better, in my opinion, one of my favorites being Heidi Ho. I'm an easy man to please. You make something goofy like that, and I am on board so hard. A fun little homage to Cab Calloway that does not take itself very seriously and is just there for fun. The first time I listened to it, I knew it was probably the worst song on the album, but it was definitely going to be my favorite. Another song that surprised me with its direction was Into the Twilight. Had I heard this in the wild, I don't think I would ever have guessed that it was a Jack White song. Sounding more like something out of the 80s synth pop era, but with like a little more hair on it. The song What's the Trick is one of the stronger tracks on the album. It's boisterous, blustering, pummels through its runtime with energy and attitude. It's a little repetitive, but that works in the song's favor. You have this one driving hook to keep you, hooked. And it drags you through the song versus many of the other tracks which feel, sporadic. While I enjoy the album well enough, I can't help but feel like so much of it is overcooked. Like each track is trying so desperately to sound off the wall and hyperactive. So laden with cheap attempts at grabbing your attention that for the most part, any of the themes of any of these songs is kind of lost on me. If I had to guess, every song has the same theme, which is, hey, look at me, isn't this loud and wild rock music? Notice me, notice my genius, please. Entering Heaven Alive, on the other hand, really alleviates all of this. The tone of this album is far more stripped down, which makes everything much less cluttered and allows each song to have its own identity. What's more, there's actually still a lot of risk-taking on this album, and to me, it works even better here. Where on the slickly produced Fear of the Dawn, Jack's idea of trying new things and pushing boundaries really just seems to boil down to how much noise he can cram into every available space on every track. Entering Heaven Alive, we see him actually trying completely different styles of song structure. All of it sounds unmistakably Jack White, but in ways that I haven't heard before. The song I've Got You Surrounded almost sounds like Jack's take on like lounge music or soft jazz. This alone just sounds like new territory from him, more so than anything on Fear of Dawn. My favorite song off the album, If I Die Tomorrow, might be the best example of how Jack does better when he restrains himself a little bit. It's a soft acoustic tune, and there's this accompanying drone of something that sounds like a pan flute, but like digital. I assume it's just something off of a keyboard, but I don't know for sure. With electric guitar coming in to ramp up the energy for the back half, but only slightly. Just enough to make it hit, and it feels all the more effective for it. The whole album really is a beautiful example of Jack's ability to blend his traditional songwriting styles of, driving piano rock, folk rock, classic rock, and overall old school inspirations with his more modern sensibilities, capabilities, experience, and perspective. This is exactly what I'd expect the frontman of the White Stripes to be doing and sounding like after having his songwriting mature for about a decade. Each song accomplishes its goal, stands on its own legs, some having concepts that are mature like Please God Don't Tell Anyone, and some are a little more silly like Queen of the Bee. They are all unmistakably Jack White, and they are all quality additions to the discography. Whereas on Fear of Dawn, each song is vying so hard to be loud and frantic and in your face that none of the songs really stuck out for me. They just all mushed together in the sea of noise. This is probably why I ended up liking Heidi Ho so much, because it's a complete tonal shift from the rest of the album. Not in terms of its energy, but just in terms of its lightheartedness Again, not that I'm saying Fear of the Dawn is a bad album. I enjoy it, but when every song is hitting you over the head with just how much it's trying to impress you, it feels almost exhausting to be impressed by any of it. So for my money, Entering Heaven Alive is the superior album. But I'm curious if I'm in the minority here. I know Fear of the Dawn has its fans, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Which album do you like better? Or are they both great and you can't choose? Or are they both trash and you hate them? What do you think and why? Comment below, let me know. If you enjoyed the video, please strum the thumb, up picking or down picking, any which way, it's okay. Please subscribe if you'd like to come back. Thanks for coming back if you're already subscribed. Always great to see you. Thanks for coming out. And I'll see you at the next gig.